What's going on, Brewing Network? It's Dr. Homebrew, and we are back here with a special show. It's not really a homebrew related show, although maybe we could con our guest into a little bit of brewing information, maybe just a little bit. But on today's show, Brian and myself are joined by Matthias from the Schlenkerla brewery in Bamberg, Germany. Matthias, welcome to the show.
Jason, thank you very much for the invitation and for having me. I think we're going to have a fun night tonight with some smoke beer.
I think so. I think so too. So for you, it's 7 o'clock in the evening ish, about right. You just got done working, and then now you're here, working again. Over here, it's 10 in the morning, and we just all woke up. So this is going to be
perfect time for
awesome.
a morning pint.
Yeah, or we have four smoked beers from the historic Schlenkerla brewery, and this is and it's all in one show, and we're going to talk, and we're expected to be coherent, and I don't know how that's going to happen. I was telling my wife, it's sort of a double-edged sword doing this show, because number one, I'm fascinated with smoke beer. I've sort of had been in love and then sort of forgotten about over the course of my beer knowledge, smoke beer. But Schlenkerla is like the apex predator of smoke beers. It's the top, right? And I'm disappointed because I probably won't be able to drink all four of these beers this morning, and then
but you can sample all of them.
But I can sample all of them. Yeah, so it's like, it's great because we get this conversation. I'm very excited about it. I got a bunch of notes, but I can't drink it all. So it'll be ceremoniously sacrificed if I can't. And maybe I'll wait. I'll just sip on it throughout the day, because this beer, even room temp is amazing. Okay. So
yeah, we're gonna be excited. You can bring to the beer altar at home.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I'll give it to Brian. Brian Cooper down there has a carboy that he's like a sour beer project, where sometimes, like, the weird dregs he'll just pour in this carboy and then force us to taste it. It's weird. Maybe I'll just give it all to you,
like
Brian.
the dump bucket sour. Yeah. But so some of this beer will live on. I think I may just do I'm switching from coffee, or doing side by side with coffee and beer, and then maybe just a little more coffee after the session here, and we can drink some more of it in the evening. So
I have another suggestion for you. What we do, like in our brewery pub, we all pour from the wooden barrels traditionally. And when there's something left at the end of the day in the wooden barrel, which doesn't happen every day, but every now and then, when you kind of miscalculate how thirsty the customers are, that beer you cannot use the next day because it's going to be stale, but the beer is perfectly fine. So we actually take that to a distiller and have a beer brand made out of it, a beer liquor.
See, See, we're just going to get right into it. Well, actually, I can't. First of all, the show's brought to you by the folks at 5-Star Chemicals. Go to 5starchemicals.com, join their homebrew club program. You get a bunch of free stuff. You get monthly informational, information things. My head is spinning. I apologize, because you said distilling, and now I'm all kerfuffled. Anyway, support 5-Star cleaning, sanitizing. That's what you have to do to make good beer, especially at home, but even more so probably in a commercial brewery. You need to clean your equipment first, then you need to sanitize it, then you're good to go. You can make the best smoked beer in the world if you just make sure your equipment is fine. Well, at least you can try. Make sure your equipment is clean and sanitary. Anyway, thanks to 5-Star. Yes, distilling. So I saw on your website, and I don't know much, when I was first getting into this, actually a couple of months ago, I sort of fell back in love with your beers. And I went on the website and I was like, what else are they doing? Because smoked beer has to be sort of a hard market or a hard product to sell, I guess. And this is what I want to talk about, sort of, while we're, weave this in and out of our conversation about the beers and tasting the beers, is how you have a beer that's been made for literally centuries, and how you compete in this sort of evolving modern palette, I guess, of craft beer. How do you do that? It's a very general question, and I'll just let you go.
That's really a very, very general question, and I mean, there's all sorts of issues in the modern market which a brewery has to deal with, from energy prices to labor shortage and all these problems, which probably are more or less similar in the States, maybe some not as intense as here, and some the other way around. But there's a lot of challenges in that: government regulations, rules you have to follow. You mentioned the sanitation, which always was a big thing for breweries, but nowadays you have so and so many more food laws you have to follow in the United States, register with the FDA and stuff like that. So there's a lot of background. Regarding the competition point of view, I think the story is a little bit different for Schlenkerla, because what we basically do is we were not a modern style craft brewery, and we're not really competing with craft breweries in that respect, as to, you know, have a huge diversity in beer flavors and be innovative all the time and have like 20 new beers every year. That's not what Schlenkerla is about. Schlenkerla is about preserving what used to be the standard for beer and what used to be common in all the breweries, and it has died out in virtually all the breweries except Schlenkerla and the Spezial here in Bamberg, so only us two. And for us, the important thing really is, it looks differently, I know, but for us, the important thing is the local market. So the vast majority of the beer we brew is sold here in Bamberg in local taverns. It's sold in local supermarkets. Our own brewery pub makes up for more than 20% of what we sell.
Wow.
And Bamberg attracts a lot of visitors because it's a very beautiful historic town. It's a UNESCO World Heritage town. It has the largest intact old quarter of all German cities, because there was no bombing here in World War II. We still have all the historic buildings.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
I didn't realize that.
It's a town of 70,000 residents, and we have 2,000 protected houses alone. And then there's a lot of other things, and museums, and a big cathedral, and a beautiful town hall in the water, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of visitors every year, mainly from Germany, actually. Wanting to see that. And within that, and combined with the local regular customers, and a lot of students are coming to our brewery. Like, we have 12,000 students in town. Bamberg is a university town as well. And that is like the basis and the core of the entire Schlenkerla operation. So
you don't get many calls for like, hey, do you have an IPA, or I would really love a Pilsner, or even like the more, you know, the German styles, like a Helles, or, you know, like a clear, you know, nothing like that. Nothing, just your smoke beer, and that's what you do.
Schlenkerla is all about smoke beer. Schlenkerla is all about smoke beer. We have expanded the smoke beer range in the last 20 years under my reign, if you want to call it that.
I do, yeah.
When I took over from my father, there was the classic Märzen smoke beer. There was a Bock beer for the fall time, and my father had introduced a smoked wheat beer. So these are still in the assortment, all, of course. There is a pale lager from Schlenkerla, but that also has a slight smoky aroma and flavor to it, because the smoke is carried over by the yeast from the previous smoke beer batch. And the pale lager was introduced by my great grandfather in the 1920s. That's a whole different story, basically. We can talk about that later on, maybe more in detail.
Yes.
And but all these were barley malt smoked beers. So what I started to do, it was pretty much the first thing. I did more variations of that. Like, we had a smoked Lent beer, which is an unfiltered smoked beer,
which we have and we will drink.
Which you have in the can, I think, right?
Yep.
So that's something for the time of Lent. Then we introduced a summer beer, the Summer Kreuzen, which is a blend of the pale lager and the smoked beer. And I think most importantly, in 2009, we started the Oak Smoke Double Bock, a beer made with a oak smoke malt rather than a beech smoke malt. And
interesting.
Which results in a totally different flavor. And the oak smoke is much more subtle in the smoke, or much smoother in the smoke flavor than the beech is. The beech is relatively harsh and intense in the smoke, and the oak is much less of that. And it combines perfectly with the aromas of a Bock beer, like the sweet character, the bready character, the smoothness of the Bocks with a high alcohol. So we turned that into a double Bock with 8% alcohol.
And we have that
ABV.
too. Very good.
I think, you have it there as well.
So going back to the pale lager real fast, I apologize. So you make your smoked beer, your Märzen or whatever, and then you take the yeast into the pale lager. So the pale lager is not made with smoked malt?
Exactly. There's no smoke malt.
Interesting. Wow.
It's just carried over. Like it's a little bit carried over in the malt mill because obviously you're not totally clearing out the malt mill before the pale lager malt comes. So there might be a residue smoke malt in there, but the real effect comes with the yeast that carries it over.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
It's a great idea.
Too.
Yeah.
It's very
well, because especially on like the homebrew side, we talk about that often, where if you're going to reuse yeast, you don't want to go hoppy to less hoppy or whatever, because it's that same thing, but that's what you're going for.
I don't know what the original intent was from the flavor point of view, because that's like 100 years ago, and my great grandfather didn't take notes of that. The reason, the reason why he introduced the pale lager in the first place was this was after World War One. With a huge economic crisis in Germany. There was the hyperinflation. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but basically the currency was totally devaluated. And in the end, you paid like 1 billion marks for a loaf of bread. And it was, it's still stuck in the conscience or in the society mind of the Germans. And we're always like, ooh, inflation, horrible, and don't devalue our money, because we've gone through 2 devaluations in the last century after the 2 world wars. And my grandfather, for instance, after World War II, he started with they called it Kopfgeld, head money. Every person got 40 marks, and that was it. And you started with that, and all your other money was gone. So really, really, really extreme, really extreme times. And for those people who had houses or other property, they made an extra tax in order to, they called it how to say that, the balancing or the equalness of war deficits.
Okay, so when rebalancing or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So those people that only had cash, they were obviously hitting the worst. But if you had a house, you had to pay like 10% of the value of the house into a special tax, and that was a relief fund with which they did others. So they tried to level that somehow, but with companies, obviously that didn't work, because you needed to reinvest, or the value was technically zero because the machinery was gone. And so anyhow, that's in the mind of a lot of Germans still when they're talking inflation. So that's why everybody's like wooing at the moment with the current high rates. So in that situation, my great grandfather got a contract from the local train station, from the Reichsbahn, the train system, to supply them with beer. And they said, yes, we take your smoked beer, okay, but we want a regular lager as well. So and they were dire times. So that was the point where he said, okay, we do the pale lager. And since there was no yeast management in the way that you use fresh yeast for every batch, which sometimes breweries do these days with a yeast propagator and stuff like that, but that didn't exist 100 years ago. So you had a continuous reuse of yeast, and you took it from one batch to the next, to the next, to the next. And there was always that residue smoke flavor in there. And the pale lager became something of the craftsman beer here in the area. So a lot of craft people took it to the construction sites and stuff like that. It had a very minimalistic label, only with the Bavarian flag on it and only blue and white. And so, it was like a secret tip in a way. And people were like, it has a little smokiness in there. And so that was the sidekick of the Schlenkerla brewery. But it never was a major brand or a major sell for us, and still isn't. It's like, I don't know, 5 to 10% of what we do. So Schlenkerla is smoked beer. That's really the equivalent.
That's the thing. Well, let's open this Märzen, talk a little bit about that, and then I want to talk about the history of the brewery and smoke beer in general. See, I knew you were going to do it too. I love it. Appreciate that. All right, let's pop this open.
Well, and you sound like a beer historian, because you know all these things, and I'd love to hear from a German perspective a little bit of the history of the Märzen style in general, as well as the smoked Märzen, because you're brewing this in March for release in the fall, lagering it in caves in the summer. But also I read in the guidelines it states that this used to be a designation of the strength of the beer, that it hit a certain strength, and that was why it was a Märzen back in the old days. But I would love a little your take on that and a little history.
Before we talk so long, we drink a bit, I'd say.
I'm for that.
Yeah, I'm for that.
I mean, when I open the beer, it's, I don't know, 2 feet away from me, and I can smell it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Just the smoke, the light smoke, very, very light, very, um, just a nice little muslin blanket of like smoke flavor, aroma.
Distant campfire.
Yeah. I mean, that head is awesome. You
Yeah.
know, giant head, the, nice dark amber copper color, I guess. It's hard to see in the camera.
Yeah.
What amazes me about these beers is they can come all the way from Germany, probably beaten to hell and back with, temperatures and, come in a rail car across over here to the West Coast, and it tastes great. Oftentimes we get imported beers and they're not, you can tell there's maybe a little raisiness or they're not really fresh. But
I think there's two factors
that
there's two factors that play into this. First of all, smoke has always been a natural preservative. You smoked meat, you smoked other things to preserve the flavor, and the intense smokiness really helps in that respect. The other factor is our importer in the United States, Be United. They're a really excellent company, and they do a great effort in maintaining high quality. So, for instance, when you say that they're beating in the beer gets a beating in the container or something like that, that doesn't happen at Be United because they always book a container below the waterline.
They can do that?
Yeah. It costs
Okay.
extra, obviously, but
Wow.
that way you make sure in the Atlantic that works. If you ship beer to Australia, it doesn't help because you're going through warm water. But
Yes.
in the Atlantic, it works because you make sure that the beer doesn't go above a certain limit. And I don't know about shipping within the United States, but I presume they do something the same there, like reefer containers or something like that.
They must use a reefer. There's most of the European stuff comes in the New York or Jersey, and it gets put in the train and it goes across the country, and there's a big desert in the middle of the United States.
Right.
And if you don't have a reefer, it'll just get cooked in that desert.
Right. And then you destroy the flavor, and you get the cloudiness and all that. So that absolutely won't work. That's true. Yeah.
I love the attention to detail from not only you but your distributor as well to make sure this beer comes, and it's such a labor intensive beer. I was on your website several times, just going through the process, and it struck me like you guys are germinating your own malt, you roast your own malt, you smoke it, when you're drying it, you use the beech wood, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And have you ever thought about, or have there been conversations over the years of like, look, maybe we should just go to like Vireman or something like that and have them do it for us to save some money? Or is it it's less about the money and more about the culture and the process of the end product, like what you're sort of preserving from the, 1400s or something like that?
Well, if the whole story would have been about the money, we could have sold out to one of the big players a long time ago for lots of money, like so many others did. But that never was the issue. Like, I run the Schlenkerla in the 6th family generation, and behind me, maybe you can see that a little bit, is like all my ancestors, the ancestor line, the direct family line, and I'm
actually tearing up at that. Like, it makes me very emotional to like have such a connection with your family history like that. I don't know. I'm honestly like a little emotional about it. I think it's cool.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Well,
you're like, all right, dude, calm down.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not the big emotional type. I'm more the analytical person. Like,
sure.
At least that's what my wife says all the time.
Okay.
But I think regarding family history, I can relate because I see it exactly that way. Obviously, you have other options when you go into your business life or your professional life. And I lived in Canada for a year, so my English is okay, I guess. So I would have these options to go other countries. But being able to continue a family tradition like that is so unique. And there's only a few places in the world where you can do something in that sort. We started early on talking about the software companies modern days. Of course, these are huge corporations, but there's no family history there. There couldn't be because it's just new stuff, right?
Yeah.
And when I look at the wall behind me with all the pictures from my ancestors, for each of these people, I knew or I know what contribution they have done for Schlenkerla. What their uniqueness was. And there's this phrase, you're standing on the shoulder of giants. And I think that's very literally what's happened here in a historic brewery like that. The mere fact that we're doing smoke beer today is in part at least, the achievement of the people back there, because they decided to continue that. So that's a huge chance. That's a huge rewarding job, but it's also a legacy, something you need to continue. Like, I don't want to call it burden, but an obligation.
Yeah.
So the question of whether to discontinue our own malt production and acquire the malt, outside the question of flavor quality and flavor composition, etc. But that question, I never posed myself. Of course, you have certain things you look into on the technology level. Like, for instance, we don't have a horse carriage anymore. We use a modern truck to ship our beer. So we do some modern things. Or the brew house is computerized these days. And we're actually at the moment in the process of getting new germination boxes. So they're going to be renewed. So we do invest in that area, but the question to outsource the core of what Schlenkerla is, that's not a question. I mean, then we would be a brewery like any other else, and I for myself would not like that. And I think I'm on a good way in conveying that to my children. So they're like 8 and 11 now, so still lots of time.
Yeah.
But I have the strong hope, and that one day they're going to see it the same way.
Was that instilled on you as a child as well? Or is it something you really gravitated towards more as an adult?
I wasn't forced to take over, or it wasn't, like infused into me or instilled, as you say it. But it was always present, obviously. Like when we sat together for lunch, for dinner, whatever, my parents were always talking about the business, because business and private life, when you run a place like this, it's not separated. I'm sitting now in my office in the first floor above the brewery pub, and this used to be my children's room. So yeah, I grew up here and I turned it into my office. And my parents lived in the second floor. My mother died a couple of years ago. My father moved next door, so he still also lives in the tavern. So it's always always there. It's always there.
That's so great.
And does it always smell a little bit smoky there? Where you are right now?
No, it actually does not, because the brewery is 10 minutes up the hill.
Okay. Gotcha.
I have another office in the brewery, so there, yes, it's always a little bit smoky. But already that is an interesting story from a preservation point of view, or from a historical point of view. Bamberg nowadays has 70,000 residents and some 10 or so breweries. It depends on how you count and who's connected how, and etc. But it's roughly 10. 150 years ago, there were like 70 breweries with half the population, and the breweries were much smaller at the time. And at the time, all the breweries were spread out over town. And the lagerings, however, they were all on one of three hills, the Stephansberg, the Kaulberg, or the Jakobsberg, because back then there was no artificial cooling. So if you wanted to do lager beers, you needed rock cellars in order to make that beer. So in the case of Schlenkerla, the beer back then was brewed here in the back building of the brewery pub. And after the brew, it was transported with horse carriages up the hill, and the beer was then hosed down with leather hoses into the rock cellars, and then it was fermented and lagered there. And after the maturation was complete, the beer would be transported back in smaller wooden barrels, in pouring barrels or tapping barrels, to the tavern to be sold.
It would be poured, basically pumped in or whatever through hoses. So the barrels stayed in the caves and the beer just traveled there. Is
exactly.
That okay.
Exactly. Right. There was a horse carriage barrel, like one big barrel on one carriage. So that was transported up. And then with a leather hose, it was pumped, sucked down by natural gravity, basically. Like you suck in a bit, a little
Imagine
bit.
Being the guy at the other end of that. What a good job that was.
Yep.
I always assumed the barrels just got moved into the cave.
Me too.
That's really interesting. I did not know that.
In German brewers' language, even today, when you bring the beer from the fermentation vessel to the lagering vessel, this is called Schlauchen. And Schlauch is the German word for hose. So we still call that hosing, even though today, of course, it's stainless steel pipes. So, and that's the background story. The wooden barrel transport existed also, because at the end of the lagering, you bring it into smaller wooden barrels, 30, 40, 50 liters, something of that sort. And those barrels then were transported out of the rock cellars, originally over stairs with like a railway system, and later on with elevators. We still have that elevator, and we still use it because we still fill our wooden barrels that way in the rock cellars. And then those wooden barrels, the smaller ones, were put onto the horse carriage again, and then transported to the brewery pub again. You know that from the Oktoberfest, when they have these processions, like at the beginning of Oktoberfest, all these horse carriages coming on with dozens or hundreds of barrels on the back. So that was the actual shipment of the beer to the consumers.
So that wasn't just like a procession, like a show. That was literally how they got it there.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's cool.
My father told me, that's also a nice anecdote of the brewery. So the brewery is up on the hill, and the horse carriage starts there. And of course, it has to go down the hill. And the problem, of course, was that this heavy carriage would push on the horses. So what the carriage driver would do, he would have the one side of the carriage, the wheels, scruff against the sideboard in order to have a little brake event in there.
I love that.
Scraping the curb there, yeah.
Wow.
And my father told me that his father told him that when we got the first truck driver was the last carriage driver. So he kept his job, but he switched the technology. And of course, the truck had rubber tires. Now, at the beginning, my grandfather was wondering why the rubber tires broke so quickly, and they were always scruffed on one side. So you see where I'm getting at. The horse carriage driver in the truck didn't trust the brakes of this modern technology beast.
Sure. Yeah.
So he decided to continue his old tradition of scruffing alongside the sidewalk, and he thereby destroyed the rubber tires. So,
Man.
yeah.
I mean,
that is something, yeah.
Even that anecdote of like being on the bleeding edge of technology, where you're literally from horse carriage driver to truck driver, like that. I think that level of upgrade in technology doesn't happen like it did back then. You know what I mean? Even now, it's like, oh well, I had a flip phone, now I have an iPhone. It's not the same. It's not the same correlation, right? But horse to truck, just. And there you go. That's it. I have to learn a whole new mechanism. I don't know why that amazes me so much, but I love that.
Nowadays, probably you have to go to school for so and so long time because of all the labor security and everything. And back then they just said, yeah, hop on there, and there's the wheel and there's the gas, and go.
You'll figure it out. Yeah, don't bug me, kid. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, now you're certified. Let's chat about the Märzen real fast. I mean, I know this is the thing. We could easily do 8 shows on just what we've talked about right now. We haven't gotten to the beer yet. So just to bring up the beer
totally
a little bit. I know it's and this is what I knew. Like even my notes are just scattered across timelines. You know what I mean? I have notes from 1400s, 30 years ago, somewhere in between, just whatever. What I love about this Märzen is that it's not so. Okay, let me back up. And in the States here, we have a lot of breweries saying they make a Märzen, and there's some pretty good ones. There's recently a lot of German trained, and I say recently, I don't know, it feels like in the last 10 years or so, maybe.
Yeah.
Cooper, you can help me out with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Where like there's a lot of German trained American brewers going over there, learning actually how to make proper lagers, and then coming back and opening up German traditional breweries, or at least they make the traditional styles, right? So a lot of times we used to get Märzens that were heavy and sweet because that's sort of how they tasted when they came over. And, for the American palate, I think you sort of have to dial everything up a little bit, or people don't think they're getting their money's worth. I don't know. I don't know what that is, but this is not that. And it's very light, it'd be on the lighter side for me of like a Märzen, but it tastes so good. It's so easy to drink, even with that smoke, even if you don't like smoke. First of all, let me have your beer if you're not going to drink it. But it's that balance between the two is awesome. It's letting the smoke ride, where usually I would think you'd be like, oh, maybe it's more malt focused or whatever, but it's that smoke that comes right through, sits all the way to the end, and that malt underneath just carries it through. So it's not even really heavy on your palate, you know? It's just a light, tiny smoke at the end, and you're like, that's it. And you want to come back for more. That's just a beautiful blend of beer. Do you adjust the recipes at all, or is it basically just the same Same recipe.
In principle, it's the same recipe ever since we have been doing it. There's even some old records from the 19th centuries which show it goes into the same direction. We do adjust a little bit. We have to adjust a little bit because obviously the raw materials are a little bit different every year. The hops is not exactly the same. The barley is not exactly the same. You probably know Garrett Oliver and the book At the Brewmaster's Table. He explains it very well in there that the beer makers or the brewers, in contrast to the winemakers, never had the attitude of doing like a good vintage and a bad vintage. Our aim or our goal always was, no matter what the raw material is, we have so many knowledge about how to make beer and all the variables we have in the malting and the brewing and the fermentation process, that even if we have a bad year of barley or bad year of hops, we still can make an excellent product in the end. So we have to adapt to that a little bit. The other thing that has happened over the last 200 years or so is that the raw materials changed in principle. And that's what a lot of people keep forgetting these days. For instance, hops. Today we have bitter hops and aroma hops. Bitter hops, which are for like the base bitterness, which you use in most beers, and then the aroma hops, which bring in the additional interesting flavors you have in there. Bitter hops didn't exist till like 150 years ago like that. You know, when you talk today, Hallertau and all these big hop growing areas, they just started 150 years ago. The old hop regions were Saaz of Czech Republic. And here it was south of Nuremberg, the region of Spalt, and Hersbruck near Forchheim. And they were basically only working with aroma hops. I can see this in old recipe books from the family. That you can really see that aroma hops was the thing. And hops was the most expensive ingredient of the beer because when you work with aroma hops and the hand picking and all that, it's just awesome, lots of work. And the modern bitter hops totally changed that. Hops became much more affordable. It's mass produced. It's automated to some extent. In more recent times, you can make it even better storable through pelleting, like pellet hops or the hop extracts. In the old days, the flavor hops always needed to be stored cooled, again, in the rock cellars. That's what we still do today also, in order to keep the flavor and the quality over time. So that's the part of the hops. The other side is the barley. The barley has been bred over the last centuries into ever more yielding varieties. This is due to the demand of the farmers. They wanted to have a higher yield per acre. At the same time, the brewers wanted to get a higher yield out of the barley, higher solving barleys, a higher degree of final fermentation. This was also driven from the industry breweries because it meant they could reduce the amount of malt they needed for the same rate of alcohol. And again, that is something I can actually see in our old labeling. Like as I pointed out, the basic recipe is always the same. But when I look at the Schlenkerla bottles from the 1950s, and we still have some of those, the alcohol level was 4.5 at the time. Later on in the 70s, you find 4.8, and starting in the 90s, it moved up to 5.1. Same original gravity, same degree of Plato, same recipe, but different rate of alcohol because the rate of fermentation changed. Yeah. Wow. So these things did happen. They probably also have an impact on the flavor. That's though hard to say because even if you do taste that bottle from the 1950s and compare it to a modern one, you of course have that aging flavor in there. So there's slight changes in there, but the base recipe always stays the same. And if someone follows my lead, it's going to stay the same.
It sounds like, of course. This is more of a natural process change than an intentional market-driven beer, making the beer stronger because the consumer wants this. No, it happened over time gradually, and the beer stayed the same. Yeah, that's
exactly. Cool. And I think you would see the same in other beers, but in the industry beers, they probably reduced the rate of malt they used in order to keep the alcohol the same level. So that's the other story. And then the other thing, of course, and that's good for the beer development. We can work much more hygienically these days than we did in the old days. The wooden barrels, when the lagering barrels were wooden barrels, obviously you could not sanitize them. You were pointing that out early on in the commercial. So an old proverb in Franconia, when you got beer from a small brewery that was not sanitized as well as the more modern ones, an old proverb was, when you can't empty a crate of beer in a week, then it's your fault. So shelf life was shorter in the old days, but now with the stainless steel and the better hygiene, we can go up to like 12 months easily. And there's no problem with sourness or any impact on the flavor. And as I said at the beginning, the smoke really conserves the flavor. So actually it gets a little bit more smoky over time.
Oh, interesting. I would have thought it dissipated a little bit, but I guess as maybe the hops fade, it sort of shifts a little bit, or interesting.
Usually, from a German point of view, from a German brewer's point of view, what you always try to achieve is a balance of flavor components in the beer. So you have the hoppiness, the maltiness, the acidity, all that should be on the same level and blend into each other, and nothing should dominate the other. And for Schlenkerla, of course, there's the fourth additional component, the smoke flavor. But what happens over time in every beer is that the maltiness will decrease through oxidation. So when you start with malt and smoke at this level, and then the maltiness will decrease a little bit, your brain tricks you into, oh, the smokiness increase. Yeah. So
that's interesting.
I feel
uncle,
like, yeah.
Brian, you were saying early on Switzerland and Austria and everything. My uncle emigrated to Switzerland. He died a couple of years ago, but he always came once a year to Bamberg and got a couple of crates in Schlenkerla memory back to his home. And he always said he always waits for at least 7-8 months before he drinks the first bottle, because he wants to have it more intense in smokiness. So.
I feel like this sample that we're tasting right now, to me, tastes less smoky than the last bottle I had, which was aged for a long time. And I definitely, I'm noticing that. And it's like the maltiness is more prominent. It's richer, it's more upfront, and the smoke by comparison is decreased. That's really cool that you point that out. I get that from a judging perspective. Do you guys too, Jason, Brian?
Yeah, a little bit. I think for me, it's hard to remember. I usually have a pretty good beer memory.
Yeah.
But for some reason with smoke beers,
smoke dissipates also in the memory.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
We just did a beer judging class, and I used, the Schlenkerla.
There you go.
in
Come
our
on,
class,
Brian.
And I had a bottle that I had saved from, I think probably from an older, Dr. Homebrew episode or something, and it had been around for a while. And I remember it tasting quite smoky. So this was recent for me. And we also,
I guess you're right. I think I'm so focused on the balance of the smoke and the malt when I drink it. Like, I'm so impressed by that. It's hard. I don't know. It is like ethereal and like smoke, where it's just, I know I had it and I loved it, and it's hard for me to compare the two.
But I can see this is fresher. This is more like tasting it at the actual brewery, which you've been to, Jason.
No, I was kidding. I was lying to you. Yeah. Brian's like, I want to go there. I'm like, I've already been, dude. I'm just trying to one up him all the time.
Man.
Like, I'm there right now. I was there 2 days ago. I'm there right now.
What a lot of people actually say when they have the Schlenkerla from the wooden barrel in the brewery pub, that it's a totally different experience.
I bet.
Of course, because of the wooden barrel and the atmosphere and everything, the carbonation is a little bit lower in the wooden barrel, just because of the way it's filled and poured. But also a lot of people say that the smokiness is not as intense when they have it here on site on tap, and that's the same effect, because when you have it from the wooden barrel, it's at most a week old.
Wow. God, I mean, whatever.
I've got to go to Bamberg sometime.
Yeah, I know, man. I'll be right back. Actually, let's take a quick break. We're going to come right back, and we're going to talk with Matthias from Schlenkerla. Hang on, everyone. It's Dr. Homebrew. We'll be right back. Thanks for hanging on, everybody. We are back here with Matthias, excuse me, from Schlenkerla, and we're going to be cracking another beer. Matthias, what is the next beer we should be trying? We had the Meriton.
Okay, what else do you have? You had the lager, I think. You had the Fasten beer.
We have the Fest beer, we have the Urbach, and we have the Doppelbock.
Fest beer.
Lent beer, not Fest
Lent beer. Sorry, yeah, Lent.
Lent beer, then go with the Lent beer.
Got it. In the can.
That's the second strongest. So That makes sense to me.
It's the only product that I could find out here in a can. Is that are you moving to cans at some point?
No, that's actually a unique thing from our importer in the United States. They have a tank container project. It says that on the can on the back when you want to read up a bit. Basically what they do, they send around tank containers to their brewery suppliers around the globe. And these are individually controllable tank container units. So you can adjust pressure, temperature, everything inside as you need it. And so basically they're movable lagering vessels. And the beer is transported in those tank containers over to Connecticut to their warehouse. And there they have a canning line. And they actually can it. And that's all pre-ordered, pre-sold. So it's maximum freshness. So the tank container gets in 1 day or 2 days after, it's filled into cans and goes out to the customer. So as I was saying earlier, they have an awesome focus on quality and on freshness. And also the draft Schlenkerla they sell to supermarkets that also comes in with the tank containers, and from there goes to US kegs, Sankey's, and then out to the pubs and stores.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's very cool. Again, another thing I've never heard of, a distributor just buying. I mean, I guess it's a lot like some of these whiskey I don't know, distributors or like liquor stores or whatever. You can buy a cask and then or do a blend or whatever specifically for that store with their own private label. I guess it's something like that. But in the beer world, I've never really heard of that.
Well,
That's cool.
Be United, the founder is actually a German who emigrated in the 1990s, and he wanted to start a company to import the most renowned beers in the world. He got that little booklet from Michael Jackson, the beer hunter, and
so cool.
basically he said, I want all the 5-star beers in my portfolio, and he pretty much managed to do that. And he's an extreme entrepreneur. He has a huge warehouse now. They also have their own small brewery, do experimental stuff with a cool ship. And they have their own bakery, and they roast their own coffee, and they have African style beers, which they ferment in some ground hole and stuff like that. So they do a lot of crazy things. They have their own honey. And
I think we got to talk to this guy.
They have this tank and this tank container project. When he approached me, when was that, like 15 years ago, that he had that idea? My initial thought was, oh wow, I'm not sure whether I want to do that, because you give out a lot of quality control out of your hand. You can have a lot of problems when you get infections in the canning line or in the bottling line. So he sent his son over, who's also in the business nowadays, and he was doing an internship at our brewery, and we talked about everything, and we showed him everything, and he was so eager and into all the topic. And knowing the way they come from an area in Germany called Schwabia, and out of Schwabia is all the big car producers, or most of them, Mercedes, Porsche, Bosch, all that comes out of Schwabia. I'm sorry. And the Schwabians are known to be perfectionists in Germany. So I said, well, they can do it, and I trust them, and they just do it perfectly. And that's why you said, yes, let's go with that.
I love that. I don't think you can say that in the States. I don't think you can say like, well, yeah, the people from Michigan are known for this, so I'm going to just do the thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I love that, that just sort of inherent trust of like, yeah, okay, you talked me into it. I love that.
You're a Schwabian, you're okay.
Yeah.
Well, you have to keep in mind, Germany wasn't a united nation until like 150 years ago. There was a ton of German states. Austria was a German state. Bavaria was a German state. Prussia, etc., etc. And only when it got together against the outer enemy, they might have aligned themselves, but very often they didn't. So for instance, in the Napoleonic Wars, Bavaria was fighting on the side of Napoleon against the other German states. So this is just the way our history was, and only in like the 20th century we found our way into being one nation, which wasn't the best ways of all, as we know too. So
what do you mean? I don't understand.
We're still working on that ourselves, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, I think it's going the other way over here.
But we still have that history, and I think, I don't know about America, to be honest, whether people consider themselves Americans or Californians or Massachusetts or whatever.
It depends on your politics.
And your location, but yes, politics and location.
Like people are really proud of being Californian,
Right.
And I think they identify with that first, but I think that lacks a world view, like an experience, because it's just, well, we're in California, we live in California, and we go to Texas, we're from California. But it's also the other side where, like, Texas hates people from California because we have quote unquote progressive politics. So it's like, it's that thing. So there's a lot of infighting between
the West
where you
Coast
are.
is so far away from the rest of the country. I mean, this is you've been to North America. This is a gigantic country. And people can live in California, travel for hundreds of miles, spend their whole life and never leave California.
Right.
and still see like thousands of things and have a great experience and whatever. So that's our geography kind of lends us to be maybe a little more isolated in some ways.
Back to the beer.
And here you travel like 1 or 2 hours and suddenly you speak another language because you're in a different country.
Exactly.
Which is so great. I love that. I love that. That's what's infinitely fascinating about Europe. And I think your history in general especially with the brewery, because so I was reading on your website, and anybody who's remotely interested in let's just say beer history in general. Maybe you're not a big smoked beer fan. I understand that. That's fine. Everybody has their thing. But go to the Schlenkerla website, because there's such a history on beer culture and brewing history. So you guys are on a location that was built originally in 1310. Correct?
Well,
sort of. Okay, the well. Okay.
Sort of.
Correct me, please.
The town of Bamberg has more than 1,000-year history. So we started in 973, but that's a different story. The Schlenkerla Tavern has its first documentation in 1405, the building that is. It was at the time the House of the Blue Line, and later on it was the Brewery of the Blue Line. That was 1405. The 1310 you're referring to, that exists also. That's one of the rooms of the tavern, the so-called Dominikaner Klause, which looks like a chapel with, Gothic ceiling. And this chapel is part of the former Dominican monastery of Bamberg, and that was founded in 1310.
Okay.
So yes, there is a history starting 1310, but no, it was not the beer history.
Right. Right.
We actually don't know when the first beer was brewed here. There's a number of hints and clues, but there's no official first brewing record. And when you look at the dates of German breweries, very often they say, they're really old and, founded this and that year. Most renowned is Weinstefan, which claims to be the oldest brewery in the world, starting at 1040. You always have to be careful with those numbers and how to interpret them. For instance, the document that presumably proves that Weinstefan started in 1040 making beer is a known forgery from the 16th century. So,
oh my God, I can't even imagine a known forgery from 500 years ago. That's hilarious.
Yeah, for us, I think it would just be credence. Like, okay, yeah, it's that old. It has to be.
That's actually the point. A friend of mine works as a history professor here at the University of Bamberg, and he says the question, what is a forgery and what is not black and white. It's really something a lot of shade of gray, because back then only few people knew to write anyhow. So you really have to look into the entire configuration before you say, oh, this is false or this is true. So this makes things really complicated. And it's a debate you don't need to follow anyhow, because when you look at the old monasteries, they were all brewing beer, and whether it was 1040 or 1004, it doesn't matter. Bamberg had a Benedictine monastery. They started in 1008, and of course they brewed beer. And here the Dominican monastery next to our tavern, which started in 1310, yes, of course they brewed beer, because baking bread and brewing beer was the essential thing which everybody did at home. The housewives did it, and then you had the commercial breweries, you had the monastery breweries. That was the common thing. It's like we cook today. They brewed their beer and they made their bread. It was the normal thing. The Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale. Today I bake, tomorrow I brew, and the next I'm going to steal the child from the princess. That's. But the first two phrases really convey how the time back then was. To make you totally confused, there's even another date. It's 1387. I mentioned that we have the beer lagerings up on the hill, and they have the first documentation actually in 1387, at least a premise there. And it was owned by a brewer at the time. So very likely he was using it for lagering beer back then. The document doesn't say that. So this is an interpretation. But why would a brewer own a premise like that with a rock cellar if not use it for making beer? So there's tons of numbers in there. And we know for sure that beer was brewed in our house starting 1538. So this is like the oldest we can prove, to the extent that the owner at the time was a patron, a cooper, and also a brewer, because in Bamberg, the coopers and the brewers were associated in the same guild. Because making barrels and brewing beer was always interconnected, because obviously the brewers needed barrels. And also the buckets for the production process, they all did that themselves. And in fact, when you were a cooper in Bamberg, you could do one additional test, and then you could call yourself brewer. So that was a very, very intertwined thing. So Brian, your family must have come from a line of brewers, probably.
The barrel makers, yeah.
There you go. That's why.
Yeah.
Do you get caught up? Do you get caught up in
depends.
that, like a lot of the dates where it's like, okay, well, it has to be this, or is it sort of just more like, it's fun to think about, but it doesn't really matter, like how long you've been brewing that, like if it's 1500s, or you know what I mean?
To me, it matters because it shows the rich history behind, and it shows you where you came from, so what your chances, what your obligations are, but it also shows you a route into the future. For instance, in 2007, when the Lehman Brothers Bank collapsed, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, the world is going to end, and what's going to happen?" I said, "Well, I mean, we lived through the 30-year war and the 100-year war, and I don't know what the pestilence and all these horrible things in the past. We managed the breakdown of a bank in the United States. And in a similar way now with Corona, Ukraine wars, all that, this is of course horrible and has huge impact on the business. But there was no point whatsoever at any time where I was concerned that we would not survive that, because there were tougher times in the past. My grandfather, he was in the Nazi army. Everybody had to go when he was the age, and he was stationed in various parts of Germany and Europe for 6 years, and his wife was running the brewery. I mean, and that worked, and the company survived. So hey, if they could do that, we can manage with today's problems.
Wow.
Ben in the chat says, so they've only been brewing twice as long as America's been a country.
Jeez, more like probably about 5 times as long.
I know, man, but we can't prove it. So speaking on the website of the, I'm going to get it wrong, Dominikaner Klaus. Okay. You have the photos of the restoration. So you guys renovated it in 2011. And there's a picture on the website that is awesome. And it reminds me of going into the Horse Brass pub in Portland, where just everyone used to smoke all the time. And the walls are yellow. But you have this amazing artwork, these amazing paintings on the ceiling. And there's a picture that shows after cleaning and before cleaning. And it is night and day because of centuries or decades of cigarette smoke.
Right. That was very rewarding. So in 2008, the whole thing started with a smoking ban. So at first, the Bavarian government made a smoking ban and so forth, that you have to have one non-smoking room in your tavern, and it accelerated from there. And eventually, there was a public poll where the majority of the Bavarians said, "No, we want general no smoking in all the taverns."
Wow,
that was a public vote. Actually, the
awesome.
Politics wanted to do it lower level. And once that was out, I said, okay, this is not going to be turned back in any way. So we can be sure that there's no new smokers coming in there. And I knew some church restorers here. So we looked at the options and how we could do it. And we closed down that one room for, I think it was 2 months or so. And then we had the restorers in there with the little squishes, and then they took off all the old dirt and then the little pencils. And it was really amazing. A huge amount of money we put in there, but it was so much worth it. And what they actually told me, like, I'm not an art historian. In fact, art was one of the worst subjects in school for me. It's like my daughter, age 8, she paints much better than I do.
It's same, and my kid's 5. So yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I never got beyond that Strichmännchen, they call it in Germany, where you just have it through
The stick
strokes.
man. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's just my type of thing. Anyhow, I was told that the painting style of the Dominikaner Klause is an iconic painting style. So what they did was they first covered the entire ceiling in gold with leafed gold, and then they painted on top of that with a slightly see-through color. And because of this, when you look in the ceiling, it has a shiny effect like the heavens. And this apparently is a style being used in Orthodox churches. Orthodox churches are very opulent with a lot of gold and very rich. And that kind of style they used in there. And it was, for the first time, it actually was restored by Michael Graser, my great-grandfather. When he rented that from the state of Bavaria after World War I. Remember the guy who was doing the lager. And he had the first restoration in there. And for that, he actually got the conserver of the National Germanic Museum in Nuremberg, which was a thing at the time, a real big thing.
Okay.
So,
that's great.
yeah. So again, that runs in the family. If my great-grandfather wouldn't have done it, I wouldn't have had the idea or the option to do that. And yeah. So for me, you were talking about money earlier on and what you do with a business like that. And a lot of businessmen, they buy a big car or they have a big house and stuff like that, which they like and which is okay. Yeah. If you work for it, it's yours. You can do that, of course.
Sure.
But for me, that never was a goal or something to do. So profit margin, all that doesn't matter that much for me. I rather put the money into things like that, which you're gonna, and that's my intention. These things are going to stay longer than I will be around. And maybe one day when people look up there, they will remember, oh, there was this guy back then. He was talking so much all the time about history. But hey, here with the ceiling, he did something nice. Or with that beer he introduced, he did something nice.
And he drove a crappy Peugeot or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean,
exactly.
I think hopefully your son and your grandchildren can do the same thing you just did in the beginning. Turn around, look at the portraits, and you can know what these people did.
Though
I'm tearing up again, Matthias.
The wall is a little bit full. I don't know where to put my picture. Maybe out on the street or something.
Yeah, there you go, big statue. Real quick, I want to comment on the guild lamps in that room.
Right.
I think they're hilarious. So apparently there's 4. Then they each have the crest of the different guilds: the Bakers Guild, the Brewers Guild, the Butchers Guild, and the Fishers Guild. And they even have sayings underneath, and these are translated on your website into English, thankfully. The Bakers Guild one made me laugh very hard. It was, large buns bring no profit. They should be smaller.
Yeah.
Just that I don't know if it's irony, but that sense of humor in how to run a business, because that's what it, I mean, you have to make money so you can buy product to sell it. I don't know. I think that was very funny. I
don't know. I like large buns and I cannot lie.
Yeah.
That phrase actually sounds like the 150th rules of acquisition from the Ferengi, doesn't it?
Uh-oh, Cooper, there you go.
Does.
Star Trek. And the Brewers Guild one is, water is the element which the brewer knows best. I mean, that's a little on the nose. But the Butchers Guild one is very funny too. The guild would be twice as big if bones could be sold as meat. And then, of course,
that's rule 47 right there.
There you go. The Fishers Guild is, if the fish does not enter your net, kill it with a stone. I don't know. That is very
that's something for the philosophers. I don't know how to interpret that one.
Yeah, I'll take their word for it. Sounds fine to me.
Back to
the Lent beer. Yeah,
I said that a while ago.
Well, you know what, and I appreciate, because you're going to keep me on track with the beer. I'm just talking about the history, and so I think in the middle we'll meet somewhere.
No, I have a specific question about this beer because it tastes less smoky to me than the Märzen, and I'm not sure if it's just because I'm becoming acclimated to the smoke, or if it's the additional alcohol or something. And the maltiness seems much richer in this beer.
Yeah, it is. It's the mouth feels bigger. Still sweeter, maybe too.
Yeah, sweeter.
There's an interesting story to the Fasten beer. So this was like the first new beer I introduced when it took over from my father. I think it was 2005. And I wanted to do, or my general idea was to have a number of seasonal beers in order to give something for the regulars that come in every day, to have something different for a change. It turned out they stick with the classic stuff, and the other people drink the new stuff. But okay, it worked on an economic level.
There you go.
So for the Lent beer, what we did, the first idea was, or the first background was that in the monastery times, in the time of Lent, monks were not allowed to eat during the day. That was the Lent rule. So solid food was only allowed from sunset to sunrise. And during the day, it was only liquid foods. Now, the problem was the monks, of course, they were craft people as well. Like the monasteries were self-sustained. They had their farms, they had their trees and all the labors they have to go about. And when you don't eat the entire day, that might be a problem. So you need a little bit more nourishing liquid. And the standard beer back then, that's something you have to keep in mind. The standard beers were lower in alcohol than what we know today. And in monasteries, during the day, they had something called kofent, which was something like 2.5% alcohol, so similar to light beers these days. So for the time of Lent, they would brew a stronger beer, which was closer to regular beer we notice today. And so I decided to do a blend of smoke malt and regular malt, just to make it a little bit more interesting and to bring the smoky palate a little bit down in order to emphasize the maltiness and the richness in the flavor, as you pointed out. And we actually started with 5.5% in the alcohol level, so relatively close to the Märzen, because historically this is what the style and the strength would have been at the time. It turned out after a little while that I have a legal problem with that, because in German is something they call it a consumer expectation. So when a consumer is by standard expecting something, you cannot make something else. Like when you give a person something called a car, it must have 4 wheels rather than 2.
Okay.
We have similar laws here, yeah.
In Germany, it's not a law. It's actually a thing of the courts. So if people get something which is named falsely, they can sue you and then get a refund and stuff like that. Yeah. And also in food, of course, that's a different level. In food, the local food authorities look into. Yeah. And what I wasn't aware of is that Fasten beer nowadays needs to be a bock beer, which traditionally is wrong. But, one beer historian against 100 bureaucrats, who's going to win that one. So
right.
I didn't start that battle. So we looked at what we can do. And technically a bock beer is a beer in Germany with 16% degrees Plato, original Plato. Minimum, you can go higher. So what we actually did is I wanted to stay below the 6% alcohol, because I said it doesn't make sense to go above the 6, because then we're technically in a real bock beer style, like from the alcohol perception of the consumer. But these beers were not like bock beers. They were drank throughout the day, and people did still work. Yeah, it doesn't work with a bock beer. So we looked into old mashing technologies and lautering technologies, because modern breweries try to get as much yield as possible. But of course, you can do the opposite and get lower in the yield. So we tweaked it to that point where we are technically a bock beer with 16% original gravity, but we bring the degree of fermentation actually down, so that we only have those 5.9% alcohol. And that will result in a much richer flavor, because you have a lot of final extract in that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it is definitely sweeter and less smoky and very rich. I do like this beer quite a lot.
And
Smart.
from
really nice.
And from a historic point of view, we were talking earlier on about the different barley styles and how they were in the past and how the alcohol level changed. Historically, I think they would have worked with 16 or something percent degrees Plato and ended up with 5% something alcohol, because the degree of attenuation just was normal low at the time. So I think with that whole configuration, we are very close to what an actual Lent beer in the historic times would have been.
Happy accident.
Yeah, very cool.
So I see on the can that this is a a blend of non-smoked pale malt and Schlenkerla smoked malt.
Right.
Do you malt your own pale malt, or is that something you source from elsewhere?
The pale malt we source elsewhere, right?
Okay, but that's like all this, but the smoked malt is the thing that you do 100% yourselves.
Exactly.
Cool.
I mean, with our smoke kiln, we cannot do regular malt anyhow. Yeah,
There would be no
there's
way.
no way
yeah.
to filter
I wouldn't
out
think.
the
That's
smoke
why I
flakes.
asked. I wouldn't think you could
True.
do like a non-smoked malt.
Yeah,
You need to
and
start a whole new.
it doesn't make sense to make regular malt because our kiln does 4 tons in one batch, compared to commercial kilns, 100, 200, even more tons. Yeah, so we're not cost efficient in that production. So
you don't want to save that for like 5 years after you malt it. Yeah, that would be dumb.
4 tons doesn't
that's the
sound,
other thing. That's the other thing. Yeah.
Doesn't sound small to me. That's a lot of malt.
Yeah, absolutely. Matthias, we are keeping
if you go to modern malt operations, they do like 100,000 tons per year.
Oh, wow.
And our annual production is something like 300, 350, not more than that.
Just for you.
Different story.
We are keeping you a long time. Do you have time? I mean, are you good? Are you having a good time? We're all right.
I'm fine. I bring my children to bed in like 45 minutes or so. So we're good.
Okay, perfect. Wow. Let's crack open this Urbach then.
Yeah. Right.
We'll do that. We'll take a break. We'll do the Doppelbock and we'll try to wrap up. I don't know if I can sleep after this because I'll have so many questions.
Well, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, so you probably shouldn't go to sleep.
Well, I mean, maybe I should. I don't know. All right, let's talk Urbach. What style is this? I mean, it's a Bock beer, I guess, right? That was a dumb question.
The label looks a little bit different. Can I see? Is it the red? Yeah, exactly. It's the Urbach. Okay, yeah, just making sure.
Yeah.
Urbach is a traditional Bock beer. So the history of Bock beer goes back to the city of Einbeck in Germany. The story goes something like this. Einbeck, which is a town in the center of Germany, was part of the Hanse Trade Guild, and they sold a lot of beers. And since they did not have access to a port or did not have a port themselves, they need to transport the beer with horse carriages, which was slow. So they would brew the beer a little bit stronger in order to make it shippable. And when later on that style of beer was copied elsewhere, they called it beer Einbeck style, meaning strong beer. And over time that got synonymized with Bock beer style. Interestingly, the Bock is in German language, the name or the term Bock refers to a male goat. So very often in modern Bock beers, you will find the depiction of a goat in there, which doesn't make sense at all because it has nothing to do with goats, like goat, I don't know, milk in the beer or whatever. It's just that etymology change of Einbeck to Bock beer. And
like
the
celebrator.
Urbach means original Bock beer because, and I think that's something you want to talk about later on as well. The kilning of malt over open fire is the original way of making malt, at least here in Europe.
Yeah.
So the original Bock beers, even those of Einbeck, must have been smoky to some extent. So the Schlenkerla Bock beer is the Urform, the original form of Bock beer. That's why we call it that, or it's been always called that. Yeah, we have it for, I don't know, real long time.
Wasn't it the Bavarian dialect though, like saying ein Bock beer? It's like they kind of changed the tonality, as you would say it more in northern Germany, the Einbeck, and then it's in southern Germany they say it with a richer sound. It's like where the Bock, they got it confused.
I think it's something that happened in Munich. So the story, and
that's great.
As usually with those legends, you have to be a little bit careful because you never know how much modern marketing flows into there, or mouth to ear propaganda over time changed the story.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is this one just kind of an amped up version of the Märzen, or is the recipe varying in a very significant way?
If by amped up you mean it's similar to the Märzen but stronger, yes, you're right. It's pretty much the Märzen recipe but with a higher malt to water ratio basically, and the hops is a little bit different. The most important thing is actually it has a much longer maturation time than the Märzen. So for the classic Märzen we do about 2 months of maturation, and for the Urbach up to half a year, which really does something to the flavor.
This is amazingly smooth. It really is.
Oh my God.
It's such a smooth, amazing beer.
Yeah. Cooper said amazingly smooth, and Shar said smooth amazing. And these two are Grandmaster BJCP judges who describe beers for a living. I don't know.
The best descriptors
we're just fanboying here for Matthias. And for
it's really hard,
Schlenkerla.
man. Ben in the chat, Matthias says, are the Märzen, Erbach, and Doppelbock single malt beers, or are they blends?
They are in principle single malt beers. So it's for the Eiche, it's the oak smoke, and for the Märzen and the Urbach, it's the classic beechwood smoke malt. What we do, however, since our malting operation is manually driven, like the beechwood logs or the oak wood logs are put in there by hand, and with that you cannot adjust temperature and production of the malt as you can do with a modern kiln. So we actually have slight variances in the color between the batches. And in order to level that out, we use a little bit of roast malt in order to have the same color, because otherwise consumers would be confused if the Märzen would change in color from batch to batch and from baller to baller. So, but that's less than 1%. So yes, I would still say it's a single batch malt.
I would say that too. I think you're all right.
The color of this is so rich. It's like this ruby brown, like just a coppery color with, it looks like looking into a glass ball. It's so just perfectly clear, and you're looking through it at the screen here, and it's like just reflecting everything behind it. It's beautiful.
No, it's a fantastic beer. It's like these guys have said, it's smooth and awesome. It's awesomely smooth.
That beer is smooth and awesome.
But it's well attenuated. It's rich, but it's not cloying. It's not super dry like a Pilsner, but it's still very well attenuated. And it has just a wonderful mouthfeel and wonderful flavors. And it is just absolutely crystal clear. You can't tell because of the reflections here. It's not all that.
I get a little bit, like a tiny little prickliness, and I'm attributing it to the smoke. Just like a little bit on the tongue, more than I have with the other beers, which I imagine makes a little more sense because there's probably more smoked malt in here. I mean, obviously, right? But it doesn't taste smokier, and you think that's probably because of the higher gravity. So there's more malt, there's more sweetness that sort of balances out a little bit.
You also have a higher rate of final extract because of a degree of fermentation in such a high malted beer will not be as big as in a beer with less malt. So as I was saying earlier on, the balance, which is the thing German brewers always aim for. So with the Urbach, you're on a higher level than on the Märzen, but you're still in the balance. So you have more hoppiness in there, more maltiness, more smokiness.
Right.
So
it could be well attenuated, but like you're saying, the final gravity is going to be higher than in the Märzen, just because of the nature of the yeast and the process.
Exactly.
Let me tell you, let's say you take the smoke out of this and you just have a Bock beer, the cleanliness and the what are the words I'm trying to say, the balance and the fermentation of this beer is you can't find this in the States probably anywhere. I mean, maybe you can get, I haven't been to all like I said, like the German themed or German trained breweries like Zeugelhaus in Portland, for example, or whatever. We can't, I haven't been all there, but the ones that I've had, you can't find it. It's such a, and it comes down to the lagering time, I would imagine, because people here, it's a constant battle to find a lager, even a Pilsner that's been lagered. People go, oh, it's 2 weeks. Let's go. Let's crank it out. We got to turn this over because we have to make more hazy IPA and piss Jason off. And it's like, it doesn't, 2 months, 3 months, give me something, because it does matter. It does make a difference. And we just can't, I don't know if it's I think it's the consumer's fault more than the brewer's fault out here.
I don't know. I mean, lagering costs a lot of money, and all the big breweries try to cut down on that. Also the one container fermentation and lagering that you all do in one container, and then you just draw the yeast in between. It's been just the traditional way how we've been doing it. Like we have a separate fermentation cellar and then a lagering cellar, And since we use these old lagerings, we have lots of space up there. In fact, we only use about half of the caves we have underneath the brewery. So the cost part, of course, is intense. These lagering vessels. We used to have aluminum lagering vessels, and I exchanged them all into stainless steel because the hygiene and the quality is much better than those. And these are generation investments. Like you cannot calculate an ROI of like, I don't know, 3-4 months or something, or 3 or 4 years.
Right.
We're talking decades here.
Yeah,
but
it's a great point, because most like American craft breweries and American small breweries, most of them are brand new.
Yeah.
They cannot do that.
They might be 30 years old. Yeah, and if they have investors, they have their own money into it. They're doing whatever, and there's just not, as much as they might want to, economically, there's just not a way they can do it that will please everyone, have them make money, have them be able to eat.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's when you have a 1,000-year-old brewery. That's one of the great advantages, is you have generational investments that are still paying off today.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons that makes Sierra Nevada so good, is because Ken has put those investments and those resources in, and it's a family-run business. There's, as far as I know, there's not investors to speak of to necessarily appease. And so, they're doing things like sustainability. They're focusing on solar. They're focusing on recycling. They're focusing on wastewater, and also improving their products and pushing it out. And it's that, hopefully that continues for generations. It's a great beer
Ken
brand.
doesn't have a board and shareholders and investors telling him he can do what he wants.
Yeah,
and that's,
same thing
Matthias, you kind of have that. You kind of have that luxury to some extent, which is great.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's circumstantial, and I mean, my board of directors is back there.
Yes.
So I always kind of think, what would they have thought, and what would they approved and not approved. So that's an issue. And of course, my father's still around, and he's a very strong board of directors. I can assure you that.
I could imagine.
So
you don't want to have him disapproving of what you're doing, and he's right there next door.
Exactly. So we continuously talk about everything. Of course we don't agree on everything. That's just normal. And in the end, he says, you do it as you want, and that's fine. But he always says, listen to me first before you do something, and then make your decision. So it's like the elder advisor, and I mean, he's 82 now, but he's still totally good in every condition. So I think that you pointed it really out. Coming from that long history, you really have more options in that relation, and not having to talk to investors and getting them shareholder value or something. Quarterly reports, I don't care about quarterly reports. I have my statistics, I have my figures, I know where I have to look into, and obviously we need to make money at the end of the day as well, and have to look at our costs and all that. But investments are really a strategic thing in ours and in our company, and we really think in the long run. And
looking at decades more than just quarter to quarter, what's going to make the best profit.
Well, and like Shar said, you have that luxury because you've been around for centuries. So and you're confident that you're going to be, like you were saying about the bank failure, like we've lasted through longer. We're going to be okay, so we can justify doing this because I know 30 years from now we're still going to be around producing great beer, and it's going to be fine. Everything
exactly. I mean, we can do this because we have been doing it like that, and we will be able to do it because we do it that way. So it's both ends of the same story.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
The only thing you have to make sure is that there's no generation in between that does it differently and wants to turn it into a pizza parlor and sell.
Exactly.
IPAs and pizza.
Should we move on to the Doppelbock so that Matthias can put his kids to bed in a little while?
What we're going to do is take a break because I need to release some of this beverage. And then we're going to come back. We're going to crack the last beer. And then I want to talk about Smoke Beer Preservation Day, which of course is on July 23rd. Maybe a little bit of the history of smoked beer, and then we'll split. Sound good? All right. Hang on, everyone. It's Dr. Homebrew. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for hanging on, everybody. During the break, Matthias was schooling us on not only beer history, but banana alcohol. What bananas and alcohol? What's
it started by talking about their low alcohol beer, the 0.9 that they make on site. And what was that one called again, Matthias?
Heinzlein. It's Heinzlein. It's an old name from the family, and back in the 1900s, 1/3 of the beer production of Bamberg breweries was Heinzlein.
Das ist ein Kinderbier, oder?
Yeah, and Kinderbier for the little Heinz.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with Heinz ketchup or that of sort. No ketchup beer. No. No, there's actually a story to that, of course, as well. I mean, beer history is my favorite topic, and that's what I did in Weinstefan also for my final thesis. And in the old days, people would not drink water because water was potentially polluted when you took it from rivers or from wells. So beer, however, was boiled. And in the boiling process, obviously, bacteria and germs are killed off, pathogenic germs. And the hops further stabilizes the beer. So beer was the drink of choice if people could afford it. And the problem now was when you drank regular beer throughout the day, you would be drunk at one point and couldn't follow your chores. So in Bamberg, they had something called, I was early on talking about the Kofen from the monasteries was 2.5%. And the Bamberg brewers took it one step further. They did a low alcohol beer called Heinzlein with 0.9%. And basically it was second runnings from the malt. And they did a couple of other tweaks with the mashing and with the boiling process in the final beer then and the hoppiness, but it has a relatively rich beer flavor. It's very close to regular beer, and you still got a clear head. You don't feel the alcohol, and it's the perfect day beer. So I always call it my office beer. When you have to write 20 emails, it's really good to not get your fingers intermixed. So yeah.
I love that.
Do you think you might ever release one that's below 0.5, so by law considered alcohol free?
For that, you need technical equipment, which we don't have. You need to pasteurize, which out of principle, I actually don't want to do with beer because it changes the flavor. Or you need to extract alcohol, for which you need huge material, huge equipment, which we don't have.
So the Heinzlein is good enough. That's all you need.
It's not historic because pasteurization only came with Louis Pasteur, as the name says, which was 19th century. And also the modern treatment of alcohol extraction, whether it's distilling or whether it's filtering, that's been around for like, what, 30, 40, 50 years, something like that?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be historic. Yeah, so I don't really see us doing it, not only because we don't have the equipment, but with the space and with the historic background. So, well, one day before the company would go bankrupt because nobody drinks smoked beer anymore, I might reconsider. But at the moment, I don't really see why.
Yeah, the NA beer has gotten a lot better over the years, but why do you need to make that? There's plenty of other people doing that, and it's not taking over the market. It's still a very small share of beer production, but I drink a fair amount of NA just to, like you said, keep a clear head so you can do things and, for health reasons and all that too. It's something that's more popular now, but you're not driven by trends over 10, 20, 30 years. You're driven by the history. So yeah, I get it. I
mean, the reason why I brought back the Heinzlein was because I rediscovered it in the old archives and I thought it's an interesting thing. And for me personally, whenever I have visitors over, customers and so forth, which is often obviously, and every time when you have lunch with them and then you drink a beer and then you have to go back to the office, it's like, it's tough at times. So I had a personal idea in that one, and also a lot of people in the tavern, the guests ask for a non-alcohol beer or low alcohol beer, when they have the city tour afterwards. So it made sense to amend the assortment, and we started with a smoky version of the Heinzlein, and that was received very well. And so we expanded it in Corona times because we had the time to do something like that. And so there's a pale Heinzlein and a dark Heinzlein, but that's just a thing for the local market for the moment. We plan to start exporting, but I'm not sure whether that's going to end up in the United States because I think with all the import hassle, transportation costs, etc., etc.
Has to be. It has to come here. I love a low alcohol beer. It's funny that you mentioned
have we started the actual show yet?
Yeah. Have we?
Okay, good.
Have we? Yes, we have.
It's being recorded.
It's funny you mentioned, having lunch and then going back to work and having a beer. Like, oh my gosh, it's funny you watch like Mad Men, or you think about the '50s where everyone had a 2 martini lunch, and then they go back and they have a scotch and they just. I think that's why you had some weird ads in the '50s because everyone was just drunk,
just absolutely blitzed. That was 20 years after Prohibition, maybe. And it was maybe 10 years after the war. So everybody was all like, And America was sitting real high on the hog at the time. It was like the biggest. We were
true.
like the biggest industrial country that hadn't been totally wiped out. So people could do things like have 3 martinis at lunch and still function because what's the competition?
Yeah, I guess that's probably true. Speaking of emails, Matthias, I emailed you for research for Smoke Beer on a show I did back in 2014, and you responded to me. And it's funny because I just sent it to like the general inbox off the website, thinking I'm never going to hear back because, number one, what do they care about some schlub in the US going, hey, I love your beer, what's how do I do it? But Matthias took the time, and we actually had an email exchange. And then trying to book anybody for this show, I was like, well, I'm not going to reply to the same emails. I'll just do the same thing I did and go to the website in the general contact information and send an email. Lo and behold, it's Matthias again. And I'm like,
the only one working here.
Yeah. Well, that's when it really hit me where, you read on labels, family run, family owned,
right,
but you have no real idea what's going on behind the scenes, or like what does that mean, but to have the same man 9 years later respond to an email, I don't know. It was very cool and endearing and very, I don't know. It sort of solidified the brand story, I guess, a little bit, where, not that I doubted it, but now I know you're the guy running the thing, and it's a family affair. And I don't know. It's very, it's nice when, I don't want to call it marketing, but it's nice when marketing is reality. It's not just made up for a story. You guys are living the dream, and I don't know.
The 11-year-old doesn't write very good emails yet, maybe. So, or maybe they do. I don't know. They'll be the next.
We see how that works out eventually. He's not too happy about typing at the moment, but we see where that will go.
Dear Mr. Petros, pee pee poo poo.
Yeah, not like that. Not like that. We're probably all going to dictate it eventually. We don't type or something like that.
That's all I do is text on the phone.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of people working at Schlenkerla. I was joking early on. I don't do everything myself. In fact, we almost have 100 staff. The biggest is in our brewery pub. There's like more than 70 people in our brewery pub with kitchen, service, beer tappers.
That even seems low to me.
Well, we're lucky and we're happy that we have that many, because it's really hard to get people to work in gastronomy these days. I hear it's the same in the States.
Getting good servers is really hard on those merchants.
And we could hire some more, but well, there aren't any more out there. And I was talking early on about Bamberg being popular with tourism. So there's a lot of gastronomy here. So there's a lot of competition, and not competition for customers, but competition for workers.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
It's been a challenging time, and I guess it's going to stay like that because the demography in Germany is the same as in most Western countries, like declining population and people aiming for the easy office job where they can work, 9 to 5 days a week, and not in gastronomy where you work on the weekends or in the evenings and stuff like that. So gastronomy has a tough time in that one. The brewing, on the other hand, works quite well because beer is still very popular in Germany, and it's especially popular with the young people. I think craft beer did a lot for that as well.
Cool.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm totally kidding. I'm mostly kidding.
No, you shouldn't be. It's absolutely true. There was a time when beer was something for old people. And even here in Germany, I mean, yes, you would drink it for dinner with your family and everything, yes. But if you talk to pupils in school, what you want to do, brewers was not at number one, definitely. There were other jobs.
Grandpa drinks his Weiss beer. I'll just have a cocktail or something.
I'm going to be a football player.
I think, football player is still number one.
Well, I mean, they make the most money.
They make and they're glorious, and everybody knows them, etc. And
sure.
And obviously, you don't need a university degree to play it. So certain things that help in there.
You just need massive 1 in a billion talent. That's all.
You're right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Jason opened the Eiche. I see. Oder? You opened it already.
There's Cooper, our rudder. Cooper is our rudder for this show, and I appreciate it. Yes, let's do the Doppelbock, and then let Matthias go be a dad. Put his kitties to bed.
Can we talk about the what makes Beechwood so special? That this is the Eiche is smoked with oak, but the Beechwood is your primary malt, and you use for everything. What makes Beechwood in particular so special that it makes a great smoked malt?
The beech smoke has a very nice aroma and flavor. It's a relatively intense smoky aroma and flavor. But more importantly, and this goes into the history, historically, maltsters or brewers, I mean, there was no maltster as such. Malt making was part of beer making. Brewers didn't at first look at getting certain flavors. The first intention was to get the malt dry. And so they needed a wood with a high burning value. And beech has, next to oak, the highest burning value. There's some other trees you can use as well. And we're actually going to bring 2 more Schlenkerla beers to the Schlenkerla family this year with 2 other types of wood.
Ooh.
So that's something we can
Cool.
make a little hint later on.
Okay.
Right. But beechwood was the common tree because it has a very high burning value. And that's also part of the story why smoked beer survived in Bamberg. Historically, all the beers had a more smoky aroma and flavor, but starting the 17th century, they became more or less extinct because the modern type of beer making, the modern type of malt making was invented. You mentioned early on that 23rd of July is Smoked Beer Preservation Day.
Yeah.
We were so, crazy to call it that because on 23rd of July, 1635, Sir Nicholas Halls of Cornwall in the United Kingdom, England, received a patent from King Charles I, not the third, the current one, the first, King Charles I, for his invention of a non-smoke kiln. The background story is the following. England had run out of wood, or wood had become very expensive and scarce because they needed it for shipbuilding, for house building. And so brewers wanted to switch to coal. Wood needed to be imported. So they bought a lot of wood from the Dutch. And the Dutch, which were the biggest trading nation at the time, in turn got the wood from the Baltics, from Estonia, Lithuania, Russia. So history repeats itself. Yeah, England was dependent on energy imports from the east, and they didn't like that. Right? So they wanted.
That's I never thought about it that way, but you're exactly right. Because Russia has infinite wood, infinite oil, infinite natural gas, all that, because they're so gigantic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You have Canada, you can get it from there.
Sure. We certainly do.
Yeah. So so they wanted to become independent of that, and they wanted to switch to coal. Now the problem is when you kiln a malt with coal, this coal smoke is very unaromatic, so the flavor was not very pleasant. So technology needed to be invented to filter out the smoke, and Sir Nicholas Halls was the one. And so the 23rd of July, 1635, so more than 300 years ago, marks the day of the invention of modern style beer. And it went downhill from there for the smoked beer because the newly non-smoke kilns, they were more efficient. You could build them on larger scale. You could use any type of fuel, which made the production even further cheaper. At first it was coal, later was oil, gas. So all the modern kilns still work on that principle of filtering out the smoke first. Of course, the patent was further on developed and continuous patents came. And the technology today is relatively far away from what Sir Nicholas Halls invented. But the principle still is the same. The aroma or the flavor from the heat source does not go into the malt. And that's the principle Sir Nicholas Halls invented. And his kiln, in his original patent writing, there's a copy from the 18th century in which the original wording of Sir Nicholas Halls is in. He actually writes that his invention makes it possible to kiln malt and hops without the bad influence of smoke. But you could also use that technology to dry linen or anything else. So he was an entrepreneur. He really understood what you can do with his technology, and he was endorsing it as such. And so the smoke kilns got extinct in England within like 100 years or so. And around 1800, that invention came over to Central Europe, together with the rest of the industrialization, the steam engine, the weaving stool, all these mass production technologies which make our modern life possible. Were invented in England and then made it to other countries.
Yeah.
And in Germany in 1800, the Spaten Brewery of Munich, the known Spaten Brewery, was one of the first ones to close down their Bavarian kiln, meaning smoke kiln, and replace it by an English kiln. So even in German, they called it the Englische Darre, the English kiln, because that technology was synonymous with England.
Wow.
Yeah?
Wow. Okay.
And the same happened here in Germany. It took only 100 years until all the smoke kilns were closed down. All? No, except here in Bamberg. Around 1900, there were, out of the 70 breweries at the time in Bamberg, 4 of them still make smoked beer. Schlenkerla was the one. The other one was Spezial. Those 2 still do it today in the old way. The third one was the brewery Greifenklau. That brewery also still exists, but they discontinued their malting operation after World War II. So you only get normal beer there. And the fourth one was the brewery Polar Bear, and that one closed altogether in World War II. So Schlenkerla and Spezial are the only ones to continue the smoke beer production all throughout the centuries until modern times. And so in a way, we laid the basis to now the craft beer revolution, which brought a lot of new smoke beers starting in the 1980s. Because nowadays, obviously, you can get smoke malt from the big malt producers, smoke flavored, or you smoke it at home on your smoker, on your barbecue.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of options there. But Schlenkerla and Spezial were the 2 who preserved the style deliberately. And to make a long story, or to return to where we started, beechwood played a role insofar as to the west of Bamberg is the largest beechwood forest of Germany, in the Steigerwald. So obtaining beechwood was always relatively easy here, whereas getting coal for the modern type kilns, where you had to transport it over long distance with train, was a more difficult issue. And especially smaller breweries are, of course, slower to invest into new technologies than olders are. So these circumstances made it possible at all to keep the smoke beer.
Right, because England had like massive coal deposits, right? And that was why England wanted to go to coal, because they were out of wood, and they had around Newcastle like all this coal they could dig out. But Germany had a lot of wood and not as much coal, right?
It's a good hard wood. Yeah.
Well, Germany cut down its forests in the 1900s as well. So the same explosion of population that England had happened here in Germany as well.
Okay.
And we have our coal reserves. There's Schlesien, which nowadays is Poland and Czech Republic, but it used to be Germany at the time.
Right.
And there's the Ruhrgebiet, Rhein-Ruhr, Düsseldorf, Dortmund. So it's like the largest populated area in all of Germany, in all of Europe. It's like 15 million people living in an area, but it's not one big city, it's like 20 or so smaller cities that go together, the Rhine-Ruhr area. So there's a lot of coal there. So that was not the problem, but Bavaria didn't have it. And Bavaria is a very rural country. There we come with the mountains again, where we talked earlier on. Yeah, a little bit more keen on traditions, not so easy with going with new technology.
Yeah.
And so the old tradition stayed alive here. But I think there's another story to that as well, or another addition. We were talking about Michael Grase early on, the guy who renovated the Gothic ceiling with the gold paintings.
Yeah.
I think he made a very deliberate decision of continuing the smoke beer rather than changing to other beers. Already in the 1920s, there's newspaper ads from him where he points out that smoke beer is something unique of Bamberg and something worth preserving. There's also newspaper articles on smoke beer and on Bamberg already in the 1920s, so 100 years ago. And the craziest thing I've seen so far, a local historian found that the term smoke beer is relatively new. In the old days, nobody would call a beer smoke beer because all the beers were smoky.
It was just beer. Yeah.
It was beer.
That's the only way you could dry the malt, kiln the malt.
Exactly. No, it was
fire, right?
That was the only way, right?
Okay.
And it was a standard trade. Like there was no beer without it. So to make a modern comparison, you wouldn't call a car a four-wheel car because it always has four wheels. Yeah,
Right.
it's always the same. So you omit that, and
The
so
horseless
smoke.
carriage.
Very right.
Yeah, the horseless carriage. Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
So the term smoked beer started to exist very late, and the first source we found, or that historian found, is actually a newspaper article from 1898, so 130 something years ago, and it's a fictional travel report on Bamberg in the year 2000.
Oh,
so
God.
100 years after the publication.
Yes.
And that traveler writes about Bamberg and how beautiful the town is and the unique smoke beer in that town.
Wow.
And that's an article from 1898. So that
early science fiction.
that exactly, like the Jules Verne of beer, if you want. I don't know. So it really started that early to be something special and something unique. And I think Michael Graser made the very deliberate decision and said, hey, this is something we need to preserve. This is something we have to keep for the future. And there goes the family story again. You know, when my ancestor makes such a decision, I cannot just stop that and, do something else and make a pizza beer or something. That doesn't work.
You're not going to do a pastry stouts.
No.
Okay.
Smoke IPA or something. I don't know. Other people can do that, but
what is your?
I think you hit on something really big right there. That's smoke IPA. That's
there you go.
Smoke sour.
The hops might fight.
100%. There's a brewery somewhere that's done both of those things.
IPA is not
in
a
America.
Of course.
Yeah.
Smoked lambic. I mean, in the
yeah.
old days where hygiene wasn't good, there was occasional sour smoked beer, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. Even in some homebrew setups. But aside from smoked beer, of course, what is your favorite beer style to drink when you're out and about?
I like very much the Bavarian dark beers, Bock beers. They're rich in flavor. And I also like very much Trappist beers because they're also extremely rich because of the intense mashing technique they're using. And so rich flavors. I'm not so much the sleek drinkers. So IPAs, okay.
Every once in a while.
Yeah.
Not a Pilsner guy. Okay. All right.
No, Pilsner, not at all. It's too sleek for me. Lager beers.
Too sleek, man. What a good description. That's a good name for it. Because you're right, it is. It's very polished and.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's at least in Germany, mass produced. I like the Bohemian lagers. They're good. Okay. Even though with a little buttery, diacetyl flavor to it, but it's just part of the thing. And so I can go very well with those.
A couple things that we should wrap up here and let Matthias go. As far as like mashing techniques, I'm imagining you're not single mash. You're doing
double decoction.
Double decoction.
Double or triple. Mm-hmm.
Okay, for every beer.
Almost all with the lager. Well, it's decoction as well, but yeah. Okay. I mean, the decoction brings so much more flavor into the beer, and we have the time to do it. So yeah.
We have the time.
This Doppelbock
so good.
is so flavorful, and it's so just like with the Urbach, it's well attenuated, but clearly it's well attenuated, meaning that the final gravity is going to be higher. It's a big beer, and the oak smoke it is. I get a different character to it than with the Beechwood, and it's tasty and it's good, but it's also not like wine is aged in oak barrels typically. And oak can often be very tannic, but this doesn't have like that dry, oak can be harsh sometimes. This is very smooth and very integrated into the beer. And you get that oak smoke flavor, but it's not dominant, if that makes sense, right? It doesn't poke out more than the actual beer. The beer itself is beautifully colored. It's totally clear. It's different from the others, but not in a way that makes it stand way off in 100 feet away. It's in the same family, but it's just a little bit different.
Can we talk about the smoke difference? I'm getting like a mellow kind of a bacony quality, and the other is more like a distant campfire, just a foresty kind of woody.
It's
a little sharper, but it works with the Bock style because it balances that, and you're looking for that balance, I think. But I'd love to hear what Matthias has to say about that.
For me, oak smoke is a little sweeter. It has like a sweeter thing, and beechwood, which my only experience is with Schlenkerla beers in that regard, except for going on the Anheuser-Busch tour and knowing that that's the only way to clarify Pilsner. So there's that. And but beechwood is more. It's sharper. It's I don't want to say it's not aggressive, but it's like. And it's not acidic, but that's the only term that comes to mind where it sticks out more. But oak, to me, is more smooth, more sweet, and it does blend really well with that aggressive maltiness. And I mean aggressive in a complimentary way, not like whatever, right?
Well, I think we've said opposite things. Like you're finding the beechwood. Yeah, I found the oak a little.
That's right. Intense. I'll fight you later. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll drive over there.
It's probably sweeter too. Yeah, I get that.
When we made the decision to try it, I mean, I read in old books that oak was one of the trees being used for kilning the malt, and I said my initial thought before we started to do it, because you have this image of oak is this strong, powerful, old tree with the edged with the branches being like really
gnarly and
Brian, like your background, background.
I was gonna say like me, but
yeah.
So I expected actually to be more intense in the smoky flavor. You transfer that image into flavor, which obviously the tree doesn't care about his image. It's just it won't make a flavor out of that. So it really turned out, for whatever reason, I don't know that on the chemical level, but from the burning point of view, that the smoke is not as intense. Like even when you're standing in the kiln, you can notice that it's a little bit more subtle on the smokiness. Maybe the burning value of oak is a little bit higher or so, or the rind is a little bit different. I don't know exactly, but it's smoother from that point of view, and also the resulting malt is much smoother in the flavor. In fact, when you eat the malt, you have a hard time perceiving the smoke at all in the oak smoke. And so I said we need to do something like. We did the malt first, and then we debated about what kind of beer are we going to do with it. And when I noticed that flavor, I said we need to something intense with the flavor, not like a 4% beer. We need to do a bock beer, a double bock beer, something of that sort. So I debated it with my head brewmaster, and we had some ideas, and we made some trial runs. And it turned out that with a really high gravity double bock beer, we get the best balance to that smokiness, and we get most of the smokiness itself. Yeah. So that's how the whole thing started. And now I'm coming back to the new family members that are going to come this year. So we basically did the same. We looked into old records, what other trees were used, and a very common tree actually also was cherry. And so we made a cherry smoked malt, and from that one we actually have some fruity flavors in the smoked malt to some extent. Not like in the actual fruit, obviously, but it goes into that direction. And in my diploma works in Weinstefan, when I wrote on the history of historic depictions of brewers and maltsters, or of brewers here in Franconia, I was a lot in the city archive of Nuremberg, south of Bamberg, 50 kilometers, which was in the Middle Ages one of these centers of Germany. There was Cologne, there was Nuremberg, Augsburg. Those were the three big cities. Berlin, Munich, nobody cared about at the time. Hamburg also was very big. And Nuremberg was extremely leading in technology. There's old depictions like the Nuremberg egg, which was the first pocket watch that was built in a small size. And that was 15th century, something like that. So really amazing. Most famous son of Nuremberg is Albrecht Dürer, a painter who did, similar to Michelangelo, very life paintings of people. And so Nuremberg was an art and an innovation technology center. Yeah. And they were famous for a type of beer called red beer. And that existed in all of Franconia, but Nuremberg got famous for it. And that red beer had a very special type of brewing. Like they were brewing for basically more than a day, and preparation and doing the malt and this and that. And and it's also said that that red beer also had little bit of like a fruity flavor to it, and a lot of berry aromas because of the hops, the way they used it. So I said that cherry aroma we have in the smoked malt is perfect for that historic red beer style, red lager, I think you would call it these days.
Yeah.
So this new beer, our importer in the States already has it. So they're gonna start selling it anytime, I think. It's called Schlenkerla Weichsel. Weichsel is the German word for cherry tree, sour cherry. And it's Schlenkerla Weichsel Red Lager, and Rotbier in German. It has 4.6 ABV.
Wow.
I'm hearing more about root beer lately, and I've seen some homebrewed root beer.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's become kind of fashionable.
Yeah.
I admit that. Yeah. So maybe my idea got a little bit triggered into that respect as well.
I admit that.
Of course.
Smoked cherry wood has a wonderful aroma.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple of beers made with smoked cherry wood, like on a homebrew level, and it really does have a different and very pleasant and flavorful flavor and aroma. I think it's a great way to go. I can't wait to try one of these.
Yeah. The challenge was actually to get the red color inside. That was the only thing that was.
I bet it was, yeah.
Because when you do red beers the modern way, you get the red malt from some malting company, and then you lose 70% of the red malt, and then, but of course that doesn't work when you want to work with your own cherry malt. So we had to trick a little bit, not trick, but to train a little bit on that one and do several batches. But I think the outcome is really good.
Do you have like a pilot system there that you can do experimental batches?
No, we do it on the large
you
scale.
Just do it on the
Yeah.
And then go for it. I respect that. You just go for it on the whole thing.
Well, then it takes probably what, 4 months, 6 months to figure it out because you have to lager it.
To get the final taste, yes, but usually after 1 or 2 weeks you can say whether it goes in the right direction or whether you need to adjust something.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Last thing, and then we'll let you go. We've already kept you 2 hours, and it's an hour longer than we normally do. So I do apologize, and again, thank you very much for your time. Tell me about the Schlenkerla name, because it's not really the name of the brewery when it started, right? If I understand that properly.
That's correct. The official brewery name used to be the Brewery of the Blue Lion, or the House of the Blue Lion. Later on in the 17th century, it was the Heller Brauerei Heller. You can see that on the label.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So that's still the official company name. The name Schlenkerla goes back to the second generation of my family. Also, you can see that on the label. You see this little guy here in the insignia.
Yeah.
He has like a stick and a beer mug in his glass. And this was Andreas Graser, second generation of my family. And should be back there. Oh, no, actually, he's not. I have him on the other side. No, he's on the other side. That's okay. That was a time when we don't have depictions yet, because these are old pictures or photographs, but from the others we have pictures. Okay,
got you.
So Andreas Graser, according to legend, had an accident in the brewery. We don't know what happened, whether he fell over the wooden barrels or whether the brewery horses stepped on his toes or what, or maybe he drank too much of his own beer. But he was
or all three.
Or maybe all three at the same time. Yeah. Or maybe the brewery horse.
Yeah, I'm sure one begat the other. Right.
Maybe the brewery horse was
chain of events unfolding.
Yeah, the brewery horse was drunk or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyhow, he was limping afterwards. And in German, when someone limps and dangles his arm, this is called Schlenkern, like a dangling walk, an uneven gait, like a drunk person would walk.
Sure.
And so since he also was the patron of the tavern, obviously, the regulars gave him the nickname, the Schlenkerla, which is the little dangler. That literally means the little dangler.
That's what my wife calls me, but I don't know why. Now I know.
TMI, Jason.
Well, Andreas Graser had 14 children, so I don't think that was his problem.
Whoa.
Okay.
Today he would get a reality series.
Right. Probably. Yeah. The Aussie of beer. Yeah. No, so anyhow, he was called the Schlenkerla. So that was his nickname, his fun name.
Yeah.
And people said, let's go to Schlenkerla, and they meant the person. And over time, it became synonymous for the tavern and for the beer. Again, it was Michael Graser, his son, who made the decision to actually name the product on the labels and put the name Schlenkerla there. He even got Schlenkerla trade marketed in the 1920s already, which was really, really early. Like we still have it trade marketed today, but he was really early on. I don't think any other local craft brewer, small brewer at the time would think of something like a trademark.
Yeah. Do you think of yourself as a craft brewer, or just like or more historical preserver?
Historical preserver.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's hard to define what a craft brewer really is. There's so many different approaches to it. There's the creativity of creating new flavors, of trying out crazy recipes which work in the end. That's not something I do. Then there's the craft brewer who is really keen on the craft, on how to handle things and how to do things perfectly in the brewery. I think that's something I could relate to and that we'll go into. But for that, I have excellent staff. Like I don't stand on in the brew house all the time. I need to answer my emails, like guys from you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right, no, that's the analytical and the just quality control side of things. That's what you're leaning towards, and you have people that do that, and you oversee that and make sure it's all cool.
Exactly. So I do the historic research for new styles. I think the theoretical part on how we actually do the beer. And then I talk to my head brewmaster, and then we like do occasional changes and stuff. And then we do the tastings together, and we develop it from there. But the historic background comes from my end.
I would argue that you have a creative side to, because you're bringing in a number of new things, you know, with the research and knowing, okay, this is going to be something cool and something from the history that you revived or whatever. But you're bringing in creative aspects that weren't there 20 years ago, and you know it's going to be part of the legacy going forwards. You know, what will survive, what will the next generation do with it, we don't know, but you know, it's fun that you're steering the ship and you're doing some fun things, but the Meritzen is still where it's all at, and that you keep that as consistent with the history as you absolutely can. And you know, that's great.
These new beers are great. I mean, everything is awesome every time, you know. And I know you were talking a little bit about influences, and when we were talking about craft beer, and when I made my funny joke, I know a couple of smoke beers that are very, very popular in the U.S. that were directly influenced from you. I know, like Rogue Smoke, the Alaskan Porter, which has happened to be done by the same guy, but still, it's like those kinds of things that are iconic in the craft beer world are directly reflected from Schlenkerla beers. And I don't know, it's just such an awesome moment to be able to talk to you. I really appreciate the time you're taking, Matthias. It's you know, incredible. I love it.
Thank you so much, Matthias.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I really feel honored the way you see it. And I mean, it's not my works, it's the works of the guys back there. And I try to continue it to the best of my abilities. And the way it's appreciated by guys like you, and also by some of those copiers.
Of course. It's not something I drink. I can't drink it every day myself, but like when I'm educating a new round of people that are becoming beer judge, this is a style you need to understand, and you bring it in, and sometimes it's that wow beer. It's like an eye opener, and there's like they either love it or hate it, and it's just like, wow, that's so different from anything I've ever tasted. And when I'm educating a new round of beer judges, they absolutely need to understand the Bamberg smoked beer, and it's always your beer here. So
exactly.
Well, and then when my daughter interviews your son, Matthias, I feel like they will both reflect on where we've been.
Remember when our dads were talking about stuff? No, Matthias, we feel very honored to be able to talk to you, and it was really exciting for all of us. And I know I was a little nervous about, wow, I get to talk to the Schlenkerla brewer, and it's an honor and really a privilege, and really a wonderful thing for us to be able to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll let you get out of here, Matthias. I really appreciate it. Everybody go to schlenkerla.de.
Yep.
And
.com.
Don't worry.
.com works also.
.com works also. Okay. Don't worry. It's in English, everybody. Or
even
just Google it.
Smokebeer.com for Americans. You know, smokebeer.com. It's on the bottle. It works.
Google will correct your spelling. It's fine, and it's really such a treasure trove of beer history. Not only again it's smoke, but just in general. And Matthias, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Right here is where we need to challenge the American homebrewers to clone the Schlenkerla Rauchbier, the Meritzen, and get it just right where we could taste it side by side.
That's usually what we do, Matthias, is we judge home brewers. Actually, our next show we'll have a home brewer on, and we have, instead of you, we'll have the home brewer, and they get to ask questions of these guys, because these guys know what they're talking about. I just make shit up. And but we took a detour because recently we're super passionate, I guess, about smoke beer, and it's of course smoke beer preservation day coming up next month. So I thought it'd be fun. Anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll let you go and say goodnight to your family.
Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the Smoke Beer Preservation Day and the first of smoked beers. And if any of you, also your viewers, have some more informational needs, the contact form on the Schlenkerla side, I usually answer those emails very quickly.
You do. Absolutely.
So, you may regret saying that, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you very much. Take care.
Right.
Thank you. Good night.
Gute Nacht.
Gute Nacht.
Gute Nacht.
Oh, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me with that show? It's 2 hours. Should we just split this into two shows?
Yeah,
it doesn't.
Maybe.
No.
Incredible.
We didn't really talk
Matthias
too much.
is such a nice guy, and he's such a fountain of information about everything. What an amazing guest.
Real history. This is my favorite Dr. Homebrew episode we've ever recorded.
Absolutely.
I agree with you with that, Brian. That's amazing.
Should we split this into 2 fucking shows? Let's talk about it later. Let's talk about it later.
We'll take a break.
Yeah, let's get at it. We're going to get out of here.
Into the show.
We're into the show and get out of here.
Tell people where to send their homebrew too.
That's right. That's what I'm about to do. If you want to be on the show, you don't have to be as knowledgeable as Matthias, but it does help. Enter Brian at thebrewingnetwork.com into your compose section of your email. Whatever the fuck. Yeah. I've had smoke beer all morning. What do you want from me? Anyway, send an email to Brian at thebrewingnetwork.com, and we will take anything you've made at home. Not like a birdhouse or anything, but sauerkraut. Look, if you make kimchi. Fucking sausage at home, we'll eat sausage. I don't really care.
I don't know about that. We'll dump it in some beer and we'll see what happens.
Kombucha, anything you want.
Whiskey.
Brian at thebrewingnetwork.com. And we'll get you on the show. It'll be great. If you are listening live, stay tuned, because I do believe we have another show. Ben. I think we're doing another show.
Ben, are you watching?
Yeah,
are
Ben.
we still planning on doing that? Okay, we can do that.
I don't know. I'll talk to you. We'll talk to you guys after the thing. Ben's probably been hanging on like, yeah, motherfucker, I want to do this. Anyway,
we did originally have a book for noon, and now it's 12:17. So
that's we're not too bad.
That's considering it's us. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in, and until next time, we'll see you later.
Good day.